Hello, welcome to Paramusic TV. I'm Johnny Long, bringing you another edition of Paramusic Mysteries. And on this edition, we'll be focusing on the Defeo murders in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you already know that the Defeo murders are eternally linked with the Amityville horror. I'm also doing videos on that. You can watch these as a companion piece, showing you how everything played out, that there can be reasons why certain things happened in both cases that tie them together, and all the controversy over what actually happened, what didn't happen, if it happened at all. While it is clear that the Defeos were a highly dysfunctional family and was most likely the motivating factor behind what happened, Ron Sr. was a strict disciplinarian and some would say abusive, but there were also ties within the family to organized crime, which in the beginning had to at least be seriously considered as a possibility as to why these murders occurred. At the local hangout, Henry's Bar, in Amityville, Long Island, New York, a few people were inside enjoying a few drinks when somebody came into the bar. Everybody knew him. It was Ronald Defeo, also known to most of them as Butch. Although apparently this time, Defeo did not come in looking for drinks. Instead, he was distraught and exclaimed to the other people inside that his mother and father had been shot and he believed them to be dead. The few patrons inside followed him back to his nearby home, 112 Ocean Avenue, and upon venturing inside, although Ronald would not go inside himself, claiming he would never step foot inside that house again, they would find that not only were Ronald Defeo Sr. and his wife Louise dead in their beds, so were his other four siblings, Don, Allison, Mark, and John. All of them had been shot. Joe Yesuit, who was a friend of Defeo's, would be the one who would call the Suffolk County Police Department. Now everyone believed that Ronald was lucky because he wasn't home during the time of the murders, or he also would have been killed. He would be taken to the police station for his own protection. He had told police that he felt that the killings had been carried out by a mafia hitman by the name of Louis Fellini. However, as questioning continued, police began to see inconsistencies in his version of the events. And Fellini had an alibi proving he was out of state. Defeo finally told detectives, "Once I started, I couldn't stop. It went so fast." Now let's take a closer look into the Defeo family and the atmosphere in which they grew up. Ronald Defeo Sr. was born November 16, 1930, to Rocco and Antoinette Defeo. When Ronnie was younger, he was very handsome and was able to attract the attention of Louise Marie Brigante. Louise had been pursuing a modeling career and was even friends with legendary singer Mel Torme. But after a brief courtship, Ronnie and Louise got married, but the Brigantes did not approve of Ronnie, and they cut all ties till 1951, when Ronald Joseph Defeo Jr. was born. Now, it has been shown that the relationship between father and son was at the very least tumultuous. Now, Butch, as a child, was overweight and would remain so until his teenage years. and he began using amphetamines. His life in school was no picnic, as he was constantly made fun of for being overweight. Now, as time went on, of course, the other children would be born. It was that after the birth of their second-to-last child, Mark, that Louise had decided to leave Ron Sr. Through this time, Ronald Defeo Sr. would actually co-write a song called The Real Thing, which was something he was using to woo Louise back into his life. The song was actually recorded by jazz great Joe Williams on his album One is a Lonesome Number. And for all intents and purposes, it does seem that this worked. Ronnie and Louise did reconcile, and they would have yet another child, John Matthew. But it was also during this time that the family would move into the luxurious home on 112 Ocean Avenue. Many people wondered how Ronnie was able to afford such a home. But the answer was quite simple. It was purchased by Michael Brigante, Louise's father. Now armed with a new house and also a new job, life in the Defeo family continued, down the same track it had been all this time. And in his later teen years, Butch began to spiral downward as well. He began using heroin and experienced violent outbursts while in school, which would lead into the Defeos trying to talk Ronnie into being seen by a psychologist, which he refused. Then the Defeos, in an attempt to hopefully curb his behavior, he was also given a job at the car dealership. He would be given a $14,000 speedboat, which at that time was probably more like an $80,000 speedboat now, and a vehicle from the Buick dealership, a Buick Electra. But instead, they would be fueling his drug habit. And also, he began compiling an arsenal of guns, and this did not stop the violent outbursts, because there were several physical confrontations between father and son in the last few years before the murders. Now, in one such incident that I find particularly interesting is during a time Big Ronnie was abusing Louise. Butch would grab one of his rifles and walk up to his father, point, and actually pull the trigger. However, the gun, after 2 or 3 times of trying to fire it, did not discharge. But after that point, another interesting aspect of this is that Big Ronnie indeed believed that this was a miracle, which I suppose he was right, but he also began to feel he himself was imbued with some sort of power. He began dispensing religious advice to a lot of his friends, and in an even stranger move, over time he ordered several religious statues and built a small grotto. And when once asked why he was doing such a thing, Big Ronnie responded by saying, "I've got the devil on my back." Now, of course, we'll go into later what that statement may or may not have meant, but right now we are focusing on the Defeo murders. I will cover more of this on the second part of Classic Case Review, dealing with the hauntings. Of course, the first story that he told was to police shortly after discovering the bodies. He claimed that he had left the house early in the morning. As far as he was concerned or could tell, everyone in the house was still asleep, so he left for work. And off and on throughout the rest of the day, sometimes in front of other people, he would call the house to check on his father because he didn't come to work. The secretary at the time reminded Butch that they were taking his brother Mark to the doctor because he had a few weeks earlier been injured playing football. Anyway, after being informed of that, he acted like he was relieved to hear he'd forgotten about this, so he continued his day. When he got home, he couldn't get in the door because he didn't have the key, and that was strange to him, and he started getting concerned, so he went through one of the windows and would soon after discover his parents. He didn't check the rest of the rooms because of the shock of what he had found, and he went immediately to Henry's bar. And of course he would confess after he had learned that the condition of the bodies did not match his timeline, and he would have at least had to have been at the house when it happened. Now that was his first story. Now, before we go into some of the other stories, let's take a closer look at the crime scene and the way the bodies were found. And much of this is in dispute today over not just how they were found, but who was awake when it happened, who might have woke up just before they were killed, and the positioning of all the bodies in the house. Both Louise and Big Ronnie were shot twice with the high-powered Marlin rifle, and both were on their stomachs. But oddly enough, all members of the family were found on their stomachs. It doesn't appear that they were moved. They were killed in the beds. But it seems awful strange that all of them would be in roughly the same positions when they were found. Especially in the case of Mark Defeo, who, because of his football injury, was supposed to be lying on his back. All the victims were killed with a high-powered rifle. No one reported hearing any gunshots, although testing later showed that the shots should have been heard 5 blocks away. Now, when lawyers became involved in the case, it was decided to go for an insanity defense, and that's when William Weber would come into the picture. Then the story became that on the night of the murders, that he overheard the family in another room plotting to kill him. And during this time, he was watching a war movie and fell asleep. When he woke up, he claimed he saw a shadowy hooded figure with the Marlin in its hand, encouraging him to go ahead and do it. He went into each room and murdered all the members of the family.
I saw the light glow from your window as I left you last night. And don't sweat the little things, follow those big dreams, like that kiss you gave me last night. Thinking about that kiss that you gave me when you said that it's for life, even when we're apart. Well, you're in my heart, and I know that it'll be alright. I follow the sign.